Welcome to our November meeting. I'll go through the parish notices as usual first, and to say a little bit before I actually get on to the forthcoming dates about the meeting arrangements here. As those of you who've come to a number of the recent meetings, particularly the last one, we have been under some pressure, and indeed certainly last time sadly had to turn a few people who'd like to have heard the talk on Mail Rail and the Postal Museum away. We have spent a fair bit of time discussing in the Friends Management team how we manage what's in a way a nice problem to have. It's the problem of success and the problem of people wanting to come to our meetings. And the two key things we've really done to help manage that is institute the system by which some of the seats, but not all of them, are reserved, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But also for those who can cope with the technology, and actually I have tried it and it is not that difficult, if either you can't get here at all, or heaven forbid you come to a future meeting and don't get in, with the very kind cooperation of Alex, who's sitting at the front, we do now stream meetings, both live, so you can sit at home and watch the proceedings as they unfold before you, or at a later time. So if you like this meeting, you can watch it all again tomorrow if you really want to. But that does, I mean, obviously that clearly assists those who, by distance or whatever reason, cannot get here at all. But to the extent that it may encourage one or two that they might as well sit at home rather than make the journey into London, that hopefully may just dampen down the demand a little. Otherwise, we are a bit limited simply by the fact that ultimately this room has a finite capacity. But one of the lessons I think we learned from a month ago was that we can manage the ground situation here a little bit more professionally, and that we have tried to do tonight. Thank you very much for your cooperation, because that has involved identifying those who've pre-booked and placing them in a particular part of this room as they arrive, and then asking those who have not pre-booked but who we know we can accommodate just to wait a while until all the people have either turned up or are registered as a no-show at 6 o'clock. So thank you for cooperating with a little bit more regimentation, but I hope you understand that that's really all designed to make certain that absolutely the maximum number of people that we can accommodate are fitted in. What we've done, and you'll get a copy handed out to you as you leave, is try to put that information and a little bit more of the detail in a note, in a letter, and that explains exactly how you do make connection with the streaming service, if you'd like to do that. It also explains in a bit more detail exactly how you make a booking on the Friends website, because I know some of you have tried and seemingly haven't succeeded. One of the key things, which is explained in the letter, is that once you have chosen, as long as the system says there are seats available and you choose to book one or two and click on book or whatever it says, it returns you to the meetings page. But what you can't see, but you will see if you scroll down, there is a message which says your booking has been accepted. But you need to scroll down a bit on most screen displays to see that. We're seeing with our web people whether we can either get that message higher up the page, or even for an email to be automatically generated. But until we've done those titivations, you do need to scroll down when you're returned to the meetings page to see that your booking has been confirmed. But if anybody wants to talk about that, once they've read the letter, when they leave, happy to talk after the meeting. So, before we move on to the main meat of the evening, just to run through some of the forthcoming events. Of course, we have Christmas facing us now, so we're not back in this room for another meeting until the end of January, the 30th of January to be precise, when Paul LeBlond, who is an aviation consultant now, I first met him when he was general manager of one of the Heathrow terminals, is going to talk about what is a very topical topic, namely London's airport. So that's the 30th of January, after Christmas, Paul LeBlond here in this room. As of Wednesday of last week, there were, I think, 3 places left on the 3rd Night Riviera tour which is departing London on the evening of the 7th of February and occupies the whole of the 8th of February. So if anybody is interested and hasn't booked, a quick email to Mike Kay, details in the last magazine, may secure you one of the last places on that. As of last week, there were places still on the Croydon Tramlink tour on the 26th of February. As far as Mike understands, that tour is going ahead, notwithstanding the very sad and tragic events of a fortnight ago, and there are still places left. I have been asked by an external party to draw your attention to the fact that if you've nothing else to do on Wednesday night, is it? It's the 30th of November, it doesn't give the day, it's Wednesday the 30th of November, there is a presentation on British Railways on film of the railways from 1898 to today at the Deptford Cinema, Deptford Broadway. The sheet of paper that prompted me to say that I'll leave on the desk outside, and you can just jot down the details, but basically Deptford Cinema, Wednesday evening, 6:30, railways, Britain's Railways on film. Here end of the parish notices. Let me just say a few words of introduction to someone who probably doesn't need a lot of introduction to many of you, namely Roy Watts. I suspect almost everybody in the audience is familiar with the Bluebell Railway. The Friends have visited it on a number of occasions and are due to dine there on Sunday lunchtime. But many of you also, I'm sure, visited on your own initiative. Roy was chairman of the Bluebell Railway Preservation Society from 1997 through to the early part of this year, in May, when Bluebell had their AGM, when he stood down after a sterling 19-year service. A period which saw a number of major developments on the railway, of which the extension to East Grinstead, although the major one, was just but one. So he maintains many connections with the Bluebell, not the least now in the role of Vice President. And whereas perhaps on our visits we've seen very much of the here and now as what is happening on the railway as we watch it, Roy, I suspect it's going to give us a rather broader perspective and perhaps answer the question, having got to East Grinstead, what next?
Thank you. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And first of all, I'd just like to offer you an apology. Is that I spent most of yesterday in bed with flu. It's not catching, I promise. But you'll be pleased to know that it has got over. So I do apologise for the croaky voice. As Barry said, the Bluebell has been very much my life and soul. But just to put it into a bit of context, and I have to be very careful here because I've been watching people come in and I think, I know him, I know him, I know him. Because you'll all be checking up on the facts if I get it wrong, won't you, James? And so I want to make sure what I tell you is correct. The biggest audience I ever addressed was 905 people at a hotel in West London. And that was quite scary, I have to admit. But tonight it's really nice just to sort of talk to you about the Bluebell, about where we've been, and a bit about my life and times and my interests, because I like to consider myself as a general enthusiast into all things heritage, as I'm sure you do as well. I was born in the sunny times back in 1953 in Tulse Hill, and we were very close to the station, and even as a young baby, when my mother used to push me along in my Silver Cross tram, I used to scream every time we went behind the back of the signal box that used to be at Tulse Hill Station. And Mother couldn't work out why, but nonetheless, we moved, when I think it was about 1, and we moved to Carshorten Beeches, a place which certain people know very well, don't they, John? And we lived actually equidistant between Carshorten Beeches Station and Carshorten Station. And apparently I was quite a nightmare as a young child because I wouldn't sleep, but if I went out walking I would be quite calm and quiet. And one day Mother pushed me to Wallington, and there was a passageway that went across the bridge and behind the station, and there was a locomotive. Don't ask me what it was because I was only about a year and a half old. Apparently there was a locomotive shunting in the yard there, and apparently I shut up. I completely went quiet, and Mother sort of stood down, looked at me and turned the pram round, and for 20 minutes I was absolutely silent watching this locomotive shunt the yard at Wallington. And apparently on 2 or 3 occasions this happened, and Mother realised this was the way to keep me quiet. So not only was I nurturing my interest in railways, but obviously I was keeping my parents happy by being taken to watch the trains go past, and it began my real interest in railways. Having said that, where we lived in Carshalton Park Road, there was a well-known trolley bus route, the 654, used to run past. And I have to say, at the tender age of 6, on that very final day, Father took me down to CN Depot, and we watched the last trolleys coming in from Crystal Palace as they were doing their final turns. And I remember the wires staying up silently for many months afterwards, and gradually all vestiges of the trolley bus system were removed. And it's funny how we've gone through that time, because my bedroom window faced towards Croydon, and of course Croydon at the time had been an operating airport. And those of you that might know the area, it used to have a searchlight that used to rotate at night, and that light used to keep you awake sometimes whilst it was guiding the aircraft in. Obviously it was sort of automatic control and stuff like that. So we were surrounded by all sorts of interesting forms of transport. And like most of you, I guess you went out, you saved up your 2 and 6pence, and you bought your bus rover, and off you went. And Sutton Garage was the first garage I actually got round, and Tottenham was the first one I actually got chucked out of. And that was, it's funny, because I'm sure you've all got tales of how you used to get into a bus garage and where the foreman's office was. And it was the same with locomotive sheds, that when we saved up our twin rovers, was it 5-shilling twin rovers, and we went round London, and we did Old Oak Common, Willesden, Nine Elms, Stratford, all those wonderful sheds, which in obviously the early 60s were the dying days of steam traffic on British railways. I, of course, followed mainly Southern Steam, and I attended a school in Morden, Glastonbury Road School in Morden, if anybody knows Morden quite well. Morden at the time was full of red tube stock. I can't remember the era, 28, or was it 38, 23, full of RTs on all the 154, 157, 151, 118, RFs on the 80s and things like that. But the highlight of the day was to go to the school canteen in Middleton Road, and at 1 o'clock the milk train used to come up, and those of you that you know South Wimbledon, South Morden, where that big girder bridge is, it's now a mosque, believe it or not, but at one time it was the biggest express dairy milk depot in the south. It even had its own little Planet shunting engine that used to shunt the wagons around. But bang on 1 o'clock every day, out would come the milk train into St Helier, loco would run round, and back it would go to, I think it used to go to Olympia, and that's why there used to be a stepped crossing by Wimbledon B signal box. And there I copped most of my Q1s, standard class locomotive tanks. Only ever saw 3 West Countries, but got all the named Black Fives, the named Black Fives, one of which, Camelot, is now on our railway. And of course, when that fateful day in July 1967 came along and the last steam gasped its way out of Waterloo, that was it. And those things called the EDs and the 6000 series came along, and they started to haul the milk train. And it was really about that time I lost interest in railways, because it was the thing had gone, that was the end really. But I spent an awful lot of my time then shooting around East London, South London, doing the last runs of certain RT routes, and I only found yesterday my box of slides of RT 1110, which was the very last one on the 154. Back all those years ago, and it was a toss-up between doing the last 157 or the last 154, but I chose the 154 because it was my route, and you'll see something later on just to remind us about that. I also joined Sainsbury's, the supermarket company, and I joined them back in July 1968, and I retired 2 years ago. It was a fantastic time. I did all sorts in my career, from serving at the shop. I was a store manager for 15 years, till I went up to the centre, where I became head of customer relations. If you've got a Nectar card in your pocket, I'm afraid I'm responsible for introducing that. I also, there's a confession. I was also responsible for bringing general merchandise in and worked with lots of people on that. And right towards the end, when I did conversion of convenience stores and other such jobs, such as bringing in pharmacies and working with the pharmacy teams, I was number 2 on home deliveries, all those little white vans. And when you turn around to people and say, well, I've got 1,435 Mercedes under my control, they think, well, he's a guy. And then you say, yes, but they're white vans, and they're not really that impressive. But that was the size of the role. And it was a very good time. And it's because of Sainsbury's I was able to earn, back in 1968, 30 shillings a week at Wallington, dear old 501 Wallington. And that paid my train fare, 10 shillings. I'm sure you can check it back, John, from Carshalton Beaches to Haywards Heath. And a shilling on a Southdown bus to Horsted Keynes. And if you were lucky, it went to the station. If you were unlucky, he dropped you by the waterworks and you had to walk up the track, even if it was pouring with rain. It was, and that's how my career on the Bluebell began. And it's been an interesting career with the Bluebell. When I first joined, it was 5 miles long, and now it's 12 miles long. We were doing somewhere in the region of 5,000 people when I first joined, and now we're doing in the region just under 200,000 visitors a year. It's a substantial growth, and we're growing still. And yes, we've reached East Grinstead, and everybody says to you, well, what's next? Well, we'll come to that a bit later on. In my time as chairman, we've seen an awful lot of change going on. I've worked with an awful lot of people. I've worked with an awful lot of organisations. Because one thing I believe, probably like yourselves, we can't save everything. It's amazing how many people will come up to you at meetings and say, I've got this sign, I've got this piece off a wagon, I have this seat from a coach. Everybody wants to give you something. To give you an example, we are building what's called an Atlantic locomotive. The Atlantics from the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway were wonderful locomotives. The last one was withdrawn in 1959, if I recall, 1959, which was Beachy Head. Now, everybody liked the Atlantics, Beachy Head. When it was withdrawn, it was in Brighton, and it was hidden, because nobody wanted to see the poor thing broken up. And how you hide an engine from the authorities, no one will ever know. But you do. You probably have groups of people standing there trying to deflect attention away from this lovely piece of equipment behind. But as the story goes, eventually Beachy Head made its one single journey to Eastleigh Works, where it was sadly broken up. And if you talk to a couple of the scrappers, because we met them many years ago, it was probably about the longest scrapping of a locomotive you could ever think, because they didn't want to break it up. But however, time goes past, and as we know, as I said, we can't save everything. But what we try and do, we're all doing it now, is trying to fill in the gaps of missing locomotives or missing coaches, and what we call rebuilds or recreations. Tornado is a great example of that one. And if you pick up the Steam magazines these days, there's pages and pages of new builds coming through. And actually it poses a very interesting question, because most of the engines which we had came directly out of service from British Railways. Now by the time you've overhauled them 3 or 4 times, actually, is it the original engine or is it a rebuild? It just becomes a bit of a change round. But nonetheless, we found this boiler. There were 2 boilers, 2 Atlantic boilers, which were found in a laundry in Holden in Essex. And these boilers were regularly fired up to provide the hot water for this laundry. And when the laundry closed, we were offered the boilers, and the boilers were taken away. As always, when you're given something, you don't like to say no, but you gracefully accept it and you take it away and you think, what the hell are we going to do with 2 boilers? Anyway, they sat outside our workshops for a good few years, and then people thought, why don't we build an Atlantic? We have the boiler. Well, all you need now is the wheels, the frames, the tender, all the other fixtures and fittings, and you have a complete engine. So, that actually was the start of it all. And the focus then became on, let's build the engine. We've got the boiler. And an appeal went out, and it said that we'd like to build an Atlantic that would fill in a missing gap in the preservation world. And if you've got any information, if you have got any bits and pieces, if you have got any knowledge or any information from when the locomotive was broken up. So that went out into the railway journals. Ladies and gentlemen, I have never seen so many old ladies strolling up the drive at Sheffield Park with bits of metal. I haven't got a clue what they were for, but when you got them, they were stamped with 32424 or 324256, which were the Atlantic locomotives. And what it was, my dad took this off an engine. Is it any good to you? And you think, is it any good? When a little old lady came up, this is no word of a lie, she carried this thing underneath her arm, and she said, is this any good to you? And when we took it off, it was a nameplate from Northumberland, and you think, crikey, is this any good? You know, it was absolutely incredible. So instead of this engine being a rebuild, it's virtually brand new, because over 70% of this engine is going to be bits and pieces of old Atlantic engines that's been broken up in the past, and bits have been secreted and taken home and put behind garden sheds or wherever Grandad wanted to keep something. So like yourselves, you're all interested in heritage, and here we are trying to fill this heritage gap with missing examples. But for us, of course, on the Bluebell, it's very much about trying to recreate the good old days of steam haulage, and we're able to recreate trains from the 1850s right the way through to the 1960s. Our collection, we have 33 engines, 60 coaches, and about 45 wagons. And they cover a wide range of eras, as you probably have seen us on television, because we have featured in like Downton, we have been in the Railway Children, there's one on at the moment, the Adventures of Mr. Witcher, whatever it is, that we're featured in that. And quite often you see our railway in the movies, and the wonderful of computer graphics. Having seen Horsey Canes transformed into Waterloo at the turn of the century is something quite wonderful to behold. But it's all about what we're trying to do is preserve things, and to preserve things and to keep them going obviously costs money. It's a very expensive business. I can remember when we first started, we thought turning over £10,000 per year was wonderful. Now we're just under £4 million a year business. So it has grown substantially into what we do. As I said, one of the things that I have enjoyed particularly doing is working with other railways, other organisations, particularly if they've ever been in trouble, such as the Severn Valley, when they had heavy rains and the embankment got washed away. We would go and teams of my people went up there to help them. I don't believe we're in competition with anybody, because there are other railways in the south of England. You've got the Epping Ongar, you've got the Kentonese Sussex, you've got the Spa Valley, you've got the Mid-Hants, you've got the Swanage, and you've got the Isle of Wight. Everyone's different, everyone's got a different offer. I don't believe we're in competition with anybody. The Bluebell Railway was lucky, because when it began in 1959, it was in early enough. And what's funny now is when you talk about they found it difficult to raise £400 to buy an engine, it sounds so incredibly cheap, as if you've got £400 in your pocket you could give me now and I'll buy you a Terrier. It's as simple as that. But nothing's cheap these days. The average locomotive overhaul probably costs between £250,000 and £500,000. It could cost more. But of course, we need to turn engines round particularly quickly. And of course, we require a much larger locomotive these days for the longer run to East Grinstead. That's not to say that there isn't a part for our smaller engines, our Terriers, our P classes, because they're wonderful little engines. They're maids of all work. They provide steam heat at this particular time of year, and they look the part, as I will show you later on some of our smaller Victorian services. Other things that I've done in my time, looking after our stock requires, I believe, lots of undercover accommodation. And one of the things that I was particularly proud to be able to go home to my family one day and say, family, you'll be very pleased to know I've just got £2.8 million off the National Lottery. My wife loved me for about 5 minutes, because then I had to break the news to her to say, unfortunately, it's for a carriage shed and a museum. And needless to say, once you got over that, but it's very important now to keep this stock under cover. Most of our stock is wooden bodied, and wood water and humid conditions don't bode particularly well. So it's very important we protect our rolling stock. Our museum, like your museum, has a wonderful collection of artefacts. I was very pleased to be shown around Acton last year. That was Barry's birthday, a couple of years ago, and see what wonderful things you have behind the scenes down there. And it's very much with the railway as well, because we have got what you see at Sheffield Park, but we've also got outstations at Horsham, in Sussex. Lots of our film and archive material is with Sussex University, because it's all important that we capture what we can and save it for future prosperity. And that's why, in the not too distant future, we want to build a records and research centre, very much like what you have, where people can come in and look up whatever is their particular interest. Because it's very interesting when you talk to people, because you have groups of people who are interested in railway operation, you have people who are interested in tickets, you will have people that are interested in uniforms, and you will have people that are interested in timetable. It's an amazing spectrum of what people's interest actually lies in. So the whole thing about what we're trying to do is to be able to be, I mean, everybody calls us a museum, but I'd like to think we're a museum with teeth, because we want to make sure that all we do, it actually works. You know, there's nothing more pleasing than to see something roaring in anger. And I think it's a great opportunity for us now. And it's amazing how the Heritage Railway has flourished over the years. And from humble beginning, I'm going to say that the Bluebell was second into the game, because the first one was actually the Middleton Railway in Leeds, in Yorkshire. But the Middleton actually only did goods, whereas the Bluebell was passenger, and of course is primarily passenger. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start some slides and take you through. Now I'm going to warn you, the first picture will scare you, okay? I really do apologise for this one, but there is a reason why I'm going to do this one to you, first of all. There you go. Now this I had to do last week very quickly, not because of this ugly beast, but because of this rather handsome person. Because that is 2016, and that is 1969, where he did have hair, black, and was on his shoulders. And that was taken in the booking office at Sheffield Park. And that was when we just had a little handful of tickets, as I'm sure Fred will recall. Just a few racks of tickets when we did Halstead Canes and back, and that was it. And that was where my actual first introduction to the Bluebell Railway was to... I sent a letter off saying I'd like to join a railway because we could preserve steam locomotives. And Mr. Horace May responded and invited me down, and I walked into the booking office at Sheffield Park, and in those days you came in through the signal box and in through a door. And after you cut your way through the cigarette smoke and introduced yourself, and you got this grunt, and I said, oh, hello, I'm Roy Watts, and it wasn't a hello, it was, have you ever sold tickets before? And I said no, and I sort of looked over there, and as I turned back, this London Transport bus conductor's satchel was winging its way towards me. And as I caught it, and the next thing I know, I got this roll of tickets, and he said, the car park's down there, they're a shilling, see you later. And that was it. That was my induction to the Bluebell Railway. But in that time, I've served wine, I've guarded trains, appeared in films, met all sorts of interesting people. Some of the film jobs you do meet some very interesting characters. There's some people who will remain nameless who actually, once you've met them once, you don't really want to meet them again because they're completely different on screen as they are in real life. But there's some, what you do find, people do take an interest in what you're doing. So let's get that one off. And this is a chairman. This is a chairman who has just walked 7 miles from Halstead Canes, because one of the things you have to do, lead by example, is get your shoes on someday. And that was on our last summer when we did our walk. We do a walk every year. This year's walk was from East Grinstead all the way down to Sheffield Park. And I think I raised £150 last year on the walk. And I had to lead it all the way down from here, from Kingscote, where this rather handsome chap here who is yours truly. I was senior station master at Kingscote, and I'm now senior station master at East Grinstead. But the only important thing in there is we're all volunteers, we get up to all sorts, but do look at what those two chaps are carrying, tea, right? Because if you ever come down to us and you want to join us, which is all important, as you've said, the first thing we do is ask if you know how to handle the electric kettle, because that is what you need to do, because railways run on tea, as I'm sure you know. The other thing we do at times, this was taken, we get out and about, we're all in our Pullman jackets here. This is at the South of England show at Ardingly. Now, Ardingly, every time you mention the word Ardingly, to those of you who are in the know, they go, when are you building the line back there? Now, as chairman, I have always said that once we got to East Grinstead, we would go through this period of consolidation, and we would make sure that the railway was fit for purpose. But the whole idea is to go to shows like this, and it's publicity. It's about telling people. It's amazing how many people in Haywards Heath, 7 miles away, know nothing about the Bluebell Railway. It is really, really quite strange. And but it's a great way of getting the message out. All volunteers there, and we do this every June, I think, we go there. And we normally take a coach or an engine, and it sits on a piece of track adjacent to this marquee. And the question is, how did you get that engine here? And when you tell them that you go to all the junior schools and you employ children to pull it along the road, it's incredible how many people believe you. When we finally got to East Grinstead, it was an amazing feat. I'll have some slides later on which we'll run through. We got great help from people like Nick Owen, BBC personality. Nick did lots of videos and DVDs for us. And this was taken at 8 o'clock on the 13th of March 2013.
23rd.
Sorry?
23rd of March, Roy.
23rd, there you are. It's always. Hold on, I checked. 23rd of March. And none of us forget the day, do we, James? It was snowing. It had been an absolutely wonderful week leading up to the opening. We put the bunting up and everything else like that. And my daughter, who'd just given birth at the time, she came in to me and she said, "Dad, I think you better get up." So I said, "Why?" She said, "It's snowing." And I said, "What's the time?" And she said, 5 to 5. And I said, 5 to 5? So she said, "Yes, it's snowing, Dad." And I said, "OK." And I got up, and sure enough, it was snowing. And I got down there and I walked across the viaduct at 6:30 in the morning, and I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing on a railway viaduct at 6:30 in the morning? Opening the gates, and it was snowing. But what a wonderful day we had, didn't we?
Yeah.
Didn't we? It was a really fantastic time. Other nice jobs that chairmen get are launching coaches into traffic, and this is our restaurant RKB, and this is one of the trains which we do our popular afternoon tea trains on. It's very interesting when you talk to your other colleagues in the heritage movement at the moment. The one thing we find is that all our premium products seem to be outselling everything else. We can sell as many Golden Arrow dining trains, which is on our Pullmans, times over as many trains as we can run. So the other one we do on a Saturday afternoon or Sundays occasionally is what we call the afternoon tea train. And you go up and down the line, and tea is quintessentially British, as we know, and it is served to you with cucumber sandwiches and cakes. And again, that is popular. It books up very quickly. If they can't get on the Golden Arrow, they tend to book on the tea train. And the other end of that, if they can't do that, we have Friday night fish and chips. So if you like your fish and chips, we do a Friday evening fish and chip train. One of the nicest things about being a chairman and working with people is the recognition that the railway gets. And the one thing that in my particular time was very rewarding was the number of awards that the railway got. And the railway got its awards for many different things. We were the very first railway to get the Queen's Award for voluntary services, and I was really pleased we were able to receive that. And we received many awards from local groups, such as the people that looked after the Ashdown Forest and the flora and everything that we do, because our line sides, we have to be very careful, because occasionally we've had some rather sort of wild orchids. I think we had appear at the top of Freshfield Bank, and believe it or not, they were stolen. So we do look after our line side and fauna, make sure that we're pruning trees, that wildlife and habitats are not disturbed. The only things that do cause us problem are those things called rabbits, because once you've got them in your embankments, you can be stuffed if you're not careful. But this award here was the Ian Allen Award, and this we got from, was presented to us in 2013 by Lloyd Grossman. The Bluebell, we thought we were going to get the Railway of the Year, because we'd opened the extension, it had gone really well, and we were sitting there with Dick Fern, who's the chairman of the company, and we sat there and the award was being given out, and up came the Mid-Norfolk Railway, and we thought, oh well, never mind. But what was really nice was when it was announced that we'd actually run the Heritage Railway of the Decade, which was, you know, very, very special to us. So that was a very important day to us. Other things chairmen get asked to do is, of course, give film interviews and talks and updates on the railway and all sorts of things you get asked to do. I've even had to wear my Crystal Palace supporters hat at the top of the rubbish tip to give a talk about what rubbish was contained within the tip. Gentleman here, this is Bernard Holden. Now, Bernard was founding chairman of the Bluebell Railway. He was asked by 4 students to become chairman back in 1959. Bernard was he was born at Barkham Station in 1900, and his father was station master at various stations on the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. What was sad, this was just before we opened to East Grinstead, and these 4 students, or they were students at the time, they were the 4 founding students from Brighton University, who thought the railway should be reopened after it finally closed in 1959. It's quite a sad picture, because a month after this picture was taken, Paul Martin passed away, and 6 weeks before we opened to East Grinstead, which was Bernard's ambition, poor old Bernard passed away at the age of 104, which is a great shame. He never lived. His great aim was to get to East Grinstead, and we got him up to East Grinstead and into the cutting, and we got him from East Grinstead into the north end of the cutting, but we never got him through the cutting. The day we took the mud out, I'll show you a picture later on, he said to quite a few of us, he said, "I've actually reached the peak of my career." And we said, "Well, thank you, Bernard, that's very nice." And we wondered why he said it. And it only clicked to us later on that where we were standing on the cutting, it was the highest point of the Bluebell Railway. So he was absolutely right. But one of the things I'll say about Bernard is, being a true railwayman in and out, was that he certainly kept us on our toes, and lots of the things that he said still bear true today. This was how it all began. Back in 1960, Stepney was the first engine to come in off the Ardingly line, which we're not rebuilding quite yet, and this coach here, 6575, was the very first coach which came in. When we had our 50th anniversary, we were able to recreate this first train coming in, and actually it was flagged in by Bernard. Bernard was in a wheelchair at the time, but we gave him a green flag and he was able to bring the train in. There's still evidence down here where the third rail was put, and there's a couple of electrification signs on the platform. And one of the signalmen remembers that the Ardingly line, which was double-tracked, it was singled in the early 60s, and it was literally wall-to-wall, all the way down the line, 4 SEPs, which were the North Kent Electrics. And when the steam stop was withdrawn, they used to bring the 4 SEPs into here, and they'd run out back to Haywards Heath on the down line, and the steam stop would be put in. And at that particular time, the Bluebell, once it bought a coach, if it didn't want it, it could just go down there and choose what it wanted, pull it out, and off it would go. It was a great time. Like I said, one of the things we like to do is try to recreate, scenes from a bygone era. And this is the E4, Birch Grove. Birch Grove was the former home of Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. And this is just leaving south of Halstead Canes. That carriage there, 1098, that's a 100-seater. And that was used in the Kent steam days. And that was at the north end of one of the condemned rolling stock down the Ardingly line. And this is the kind of thing you want to try and recreate. This is Kingscote at night. There was a photo shoot, and apart from the Builder's Yard arc lamp there, it's just as it could have been many, many years ago. This is one of my favourite pictures. This is an engine. This is a Somerset and Dorset 280, and this will sound a bit of a lie, but I'm going to tell you this is absolutely true. This is the only steam engine I have ever taken into a Sainsbury's supermarket. And you are thinking, the man's mad. Well, this particular engine, as I said, Somerset and Dorset. The Somerset and Dorset, of course, is a well-known line, sadly no longer with us. And on the 40th anniversary of its closure, we suddenly thought it would be nice to repatriate one of the Somerset and Dorset engines, and we wondered how we could do it. Working for JS, the supermarket at Bath is actually adjacent to the Bath Green Park station, and Bath Green Park is a wonderful overall roof station. And I got permission from the powers that be, and one night, the Saturday night after close of play, we went up to Bath and we met up with the Network Rail team who provided us with a couple of panels of track, which we laid in the car park underneath the overall roof, and we displayed 53809 in there for the whole weekend. And I think it was over 2,000 people visited the engine. But I just think these are some wonderful pictures, and it's a wonderful engine. She actually stayed with us for longer than her initial visit, and she helped us out over one Christmas. That's what it's all about. Not sure the environmentalists will be too happy about it. So, never mind. Going back to what I said about the small engines, this is a P-class tank. It was used in Kent on the places like Gravesend and shunting round various dock branches. And there behind it, you've got two four-wheelers. And that's a Brighton First, and that is the South Eastern Chatham Brake. Now, this particular carriage here was part of a bungalow in mid-Sussex, and it was found in good condition when when the building was being knocked down. So they saved the body, and a group of people restored this first-class carriage to its original condition. It's actually based on a four-wheel chassis, which used to be a British Railway standard parcels van, which has been shortened. The great thing about this particular coach was that going back through history, we actually found the family who lived in this particular coach, and the brother and sister were still alive. And what it used to be, the brother had one end, the sister had the other end, and that was a playroom in the middle. And we got them along to actually unveil and travel in it on its first journey. And that was an amazing sight, not just for us, but for the family involved as well, which was so nice. There they are again, but a bit more in springtime. These, as I said, these are quite powerful little engines, the P-class. Certainly we use them for shunting and for steam heat. This is, there's no real giveaways in this apart from the fact that that signal wouldn't have been in there. But 4285, that was a type of engine that would have run on the railway during the 50s, and particularly at a time what was called the sulky service. When the railway first closed in the mid-50s, they thought that was it. But a resident of Newark and Chailey, which is the next station down from Sheffield Park, discovered in the original Act of Parliament that the railway must never close. And that's what it said, it must never close. So British Railways was then forced to reopen the railway to run what was called a service, but we call it the sulky service, and I'll tell you why. There were certain stations, Kingscote was one, it was Kingscote, Barkham, which didn't reopen, but the other stations had to reopen to be served by the trains. And it was normally one of these engines, or a C2X, and one carriage, because that's all it was, that's all it was required. But British Railways were crafty, because what they did, there were no connections at the southern end, and by the time you got to East Grinstead, you'd missed all the other connections. So the railway was actually serving no purpose. And as we know in history now, eventually the Act was repealed and the line sadly closed. But I was able to get this locomotive from the Lakeside and Haverthwaite Railway for our 50th anniversary, as I did this particular engine. And this is Furnace 20. This is the oldest engine in this country that's still working, and she's working there with our 1913 observation saloon. And we used this engine and observation car on our 50th anniversary celebrations. And we had a shuttle going between Kingscote and the south end of the rubbish tip. And didn't we take how many thousands of fivers? Loads, didn't we?
It was a complicated shuttle manoeuvre where the shuttle would go north to the tip, a service train would come in from the south, the other service train would go, the loco would run round the first service train, and then the shuttle would come in on the other side. So it was a case of running backwards and forwards quite a lot.
It was. And at that particular time, Fenchurch was still in steam. Fenchurch is a sister to Stepney. So we actually had the oldest and the second oldest steam engines in the country still working side by side. Again, this is the 50th anniversary. You might well recognise those carriages there. That's two from the Brighton Bell fleet. There's a couple more have been restored now, and of course she's due to venture out onto the main line in the not too distant future. That's Stepney and 2. Captain Baxter. Baxter came from the chalk quarries at Betchworth in Surrey. It's a very powerful little engine. She's actually probably more powerful than Fenchurch is. As you can see there, there's our two terriers. There's Stepney there and Fenchurch and two carriages. And that was how the Bluebell ran for its first few years in service, just using a couple of carriages. And as I said, each year engines came in, and it was hard to think how, if you like, how cheap those engines were. And no, there's no distortion in the camera. That was from the Romney Hythe and Dymchurch Railway. That was, as I said, we got other railways involved in some of the things that we did. And the interesting thing about that is we couldn't recreate that anymore, because the only engine... Oh, sorry, no, those two are working. Sorry, 758 and 592 are working, but all the others are currently out of traffic. Sir Archibald Sinclair will be back next year. They're going to start work on the U-boat in the not distant future. Birch Grove's just come out, and we're going to start work on Fenchurch very shortly, because she'll be 150 in 2022, I think it is. As you can see over the back there, you've got Blackmore Vale. But this again was all at the 50th anniversary. But this is just to try and illustrate some of the trains which we're able to recreate, because this engine here, 80151, she's only one of two engines that we've got that actually ran over the Bluebell line in its operating SBR days. Shedded at Tunbridge Wells West and was a regular worker over the line. So, in effect, with the green stock, you've got a very prototypical train there. And those over there, that's tarpaulins of carriages which are stored down the Ardingly line. Fenchurch on a small branch freight. That's another shot just south of Kingscote of the Fairburn tank. And you can see that where the, if you like, where the parentage and the heritage between the two designs lies. You know, if we had four of those, that would keep the railway going forever. They're maids of all work, those standard class tanks. They're incredible engines. You could push one of those with your hand. They've got wonderful roller bearings. There's Sir Archibald Sinclair on a train, plenty of steam. Probably tell the fireman off for too much steam. And again, this is just to try and illustrate the sort of thing which we're able to create. This is an S15 847, and again, with a very prototypical stock of Southern Railway coaching. It's called a birdcage brake, the one immediately behind it, because it's got the guard's outlook at the very top there. But there's nothing really to indicate that that is not many, many years ago. There's the C-Class. Sorry, that's the 01. That's the SECR 01, 65. And with two 100-seater coaches behind it and a Brighton first bogie at the rear. Staple commuter traffic carriages they would have been at the turn of the century. Mixed freight. That's the sort of thing that Kent and East Sussex would have run in Colonel Stevens' days. And that's the 01 with all the browns, as we call them. The coal we use comes from a variety of places. Russia, Poland, East Germany. The odd sack comes from Wales if we're running short. Scottish coal, it can be very, very, very dusty, very ashy. This is probably the one. This is called the Duke Dog, and it's a 440 outside framed locomotive. It was about the third or fourth engine which came to the Bluebell, bought by REV Gone, who used to make all the badges, you know, the locomotive badges you wear. That engine is currently out of traffic, but is due to go into works in the not too distant future, probably the next year or so. But it's a very nice engine. It's got a lovely throaty exhaust to it. Two Chatham engines side by side. So here we go. So this is the infamous cutting. This is the infamous cutting. Up there is the town of East Grinstead. That's Inverhorn Viaduct, and the railway line used to curve all the way through here. From this bridge down to roughly about there was full of sandstone, and we believe that sandstone came from when they built the it was called Beeching Way, because, as you know, the wonderful doctor himself used to live in East Grinstead and was a regular commuter from Forest Road. If you like, the station is just there, but if you see that line of trees that way, and the line would have gone that way, it was like a cross. You had East Grinstead High Level and East Grinstead Low Level, and when we call it the Bluebell line closed in '59, East Grinstead Low Level closed. The high level was kept open, so all the trains from London used to come down and loop into East Grinstead via the St Margaret's Loop. And then, very strange reason, but there you go, these things happen. We've all seen when railway lines have closed. Now people wish they'd kept them open. The Three Bridges to Tunbridge Wells line closed, and all traffic reverted into East Grinstead Low Level. However, in that time, the good Council of East Grinstead wanted somewhere to put their domestic refuse. And there was all sorts of stories and rumours about what was in that waste tip. Believe you me, there was pianos, there was stagecoaches, there was reactors from nuclear submarines, there was tanks, there was everything you could possibly wish for was supposed to be in that cutting. Ladies and gentlemen, we didn't find anything like that whatsoever. However, we did find the wheel of a traction engine. And of all things, we found a spoked wheel in there, and we found something else interesting. But this sandstone, we believe, came from the cutting, and what we did, we took that line, we took all that out ourselves, and we took that southwards, and we've extended the embankment for one day when we might go to Arding Line. We've extended the embankment where there used to be a viaduct. The reason that British Railways said they were closing the Arding line was simply because of the condition of the track and the safety of the viaduct. So in November 1963, when that railway line finally closed, it was used for a while, as I said, for removing redundant stock. But it took the British Army 6 attempts to blow up that viaduct. That just shows you that it wasn't really in that too bad of a condition. Sadly, of course, if we ever go back to Harding Line, we have to fill that gap. So the use of all this sandstone has enabled us to extend the embankment, and we have 2 bridge sections which were given to us by the Department of Transport. There were 2 bridges which were used on a former railway line that went across the M54, and they had no further use for them, but these bridges are in excellent condition, and we'll be able to put those back one day if we go to Harding Line. So what we've done here, as I said, the sandstone has gone. You can see a digger there, and we're already digging back into up here, and the dark area is where we started to hit domestic refuse. And it was amazing what we found in that domestic refuse, because it really told a story of East Grinstead, if you like, and what people were looking at the times. This picture is taken from that road bridge you saw, so you can see just how deep that cutting is. When you stand in it, you would be surprised just how deep that cutting is. And as you can see, it did have two tracks. And that's a track level. Again, you can see the tree line. So to fill in a cutting is an ideal way of disposing of your domestic refuse. So, this is the Mayor of East Grinstead on that very first day, with cutting the first muck out of the tip. This bridge here, this is the North End Bridge of the cutting, and it was between the 2 bridges that domestic refuse was kept. And Ginny Waddingham did the first dig, and what you can see here, up there, is when she brought that bucket up, there was a pair of denim jeans hanging gaily on the end fork. And one of the wags in the audience said, "I've been looking for them for 20 years." But that's how it all began. And our first period of removal was done by road, and it went to various holes in the south of England. And again, I talk about my job at the time being very educational. We were told that all the refuse was going to various different holes through Horsham, through Red Hill, through Hastings, through Tenterden. But each of those holes had its own set of rules. So all the refuse had to be sorted, so we could say, yep, you can go to Horsham, you can go to Hastings. It was wonderful. The council very kindly overhauled the bridge at the North End for us, because that is a public right-of-way across there. So it was very handy for us to, or for them to do it for us. And you can see here, scattered on the sides here, all sorts of bits and pieces from the domestic refuse. In there, we found all sorts of things. Black sacks, and when you opened them up, on the inside was newspapers, and these newspapers were all grouped together. So there must be some very strange people in East Grinstead. No disrespect if you're in East Grinstead, please, please, please. But people were following court cases, because we were opening black sacks, and one was about that day. It was full of the Yorkshire Ripper. We found one of other murder cases. We found one of someone that was doing a closure of a hospital. It was quite incredible what people were following. But it was all neatly tied up. It was all neatly bound. It was in a black sack. And some of it we gave to the East Grinstead Museum, because it was in such good condition. I actually found some Sainsbury's washing up liquid bottles, which we hadn't seen for many, many years, and gave them to the Sainsbury archive. And there were tins of salmon and pilchards in there, with sort of about a penny on them and things like that, and great names like International Stores and Home and Colonial. But it told a real story of what was going on there. And as you can see here, the line was laid in here, because what we were doing at the time, the refuse was being taken away by rail, going up to Oxford and places like that. As I said, it tells a real history of East Grinstead, and that's when the track was coming round the corner from the south end. That was from the north. And this is us. We hired this engine It's the only time I think the chairman might have been strung up was because we hired a diesel engine, never been heard of before on the Bluebell. But it worked, it was the economical way to do it. Now this is a totem for you totem collectors, and this comes from a Cuntliffe. No, it didn't. It came out of the tip at East Grinstead. And it was very, very fortunate that the digger driver, that mark there and that mark there was the teeth in his bucket. Otherwise it would have been, well, it would have been pitted. But we found that came straight out of the tip. That's now in our museum. So what a Western totem is doing in one of our rubbish tips, I don't know. Clearance in all weathers. And this is Auntie Barbara. This is the very time we joined. We didn't have a golden spike, but we had a white fish plate. And this was the meeting of the two lines. And that was the day that the Bluebell Railway was finally connected to the north. The council very kindly gave us the services of their graffiti cleaners. And they came along and they cleaned the walls of the viaduct for us. And Colin Tyson said it'd be great to see some pictures of you, Chairman, having a go at it, you see. So they very kindly gave me the gear, and there's yours truly standing there with his steam lance and was going away. And Colin did his pictures, then he rang me up and he said, we can't use them. I said, but I was only scrubbing letters. He said, no, he said, you want to see it. So, okay, so I went and saw it. The bit of word we use actually said, F off you. So I said, well, we better not use that. But we hadn't seen it. There's one of the tip trains. This is day one. As we said, it snowed, 23rd of March 2030, but they all turned out. I think that was young Mr. Coward there, if I remember rightly. The first crew. And this is where I come up just a bit up to date towards the end. This is Tornado. This was the very first through train to the Bluebell Railway since 1964. Tornado, as I said, it's a new build that fills a gap. Just a few shots of East Grinstead. There's the water tower. This is a bit of an inside thing that no one would have seen this yet, because I can now show it to you. This is actually a film set, and the value of having your connection between the main network and the Bluebell is the ability to release your stock. You might recognise the station, not Sheffield Park, King's Cross. And you will see this in a film which comes out later on this year called Superwoman. And Superwoman takes place in and around the First World War. So it's not often you see a Class 91 and a C-Class tender engine side by side at the cross. Oh, sorry. More like that. I told you it was Superwoman. And of course, the other thing we've been able to participate in is with steam events on the Southern. This is a shot taken off the Viaduct, and this was an outgoing special. This was two Class 55s Deltics. We had a very successful diesel weekend year before last, and these two wonderful machines came down and performed for us, and performed very well. They just about got going, and I had to close them down. And I was reminded back in 1998, I said, I love steam, and I would hate the day I ever saw a Deltic on the Bluebell Railway. Eat your words. And I said the other ability is about getting stock out for other use. So, quickly to the future. When you go home tonight and you say to your wife, because my wife knows that I'm interested in buying all sorts of things, do you tell her you've bought this? Do you tell her you've bought this? Do you tell her you've bought that? Do you tell her you've bought that? Worse still, do you tell her you've bought that? Because my wife thinks I go home and I don't tell her everything that she hasn't found out about the 9F yet, but do that in pure. And if you're in the room and they were your pictures, thank you ever so much for taking the underground ones, because I was desperately trying to find a D-class. Now, it's funny enough, we walked across the bridge. If I'd really said to my wife, what do you think of that? And she said, that's quite nice, isn't it? So I said, well, yeah, poor old girls. So, oh, I'm sorry. Do we recognise that person? To me, this is what preservation is about. Or is it a new build? Or when you think about how much money of your taxpayers' money was spent on that engine and how much of it is original, it does pose the question, is that original Flying Scotsman? But no, she's going to visit the Bluebell for Easter next year, and we're very proud to have it. So going on to the future, just very quickly, we still want to be able to do parts of film, and we can recreate various things. Our war weekends are very successful, and of course this year, particularly celebrating 100 years of the Battle of the Somme, we've been able to do things. But you're going to say, you've spoken a lot about the railway, but what about your other interest? When I told my wife I'd bought that, she thought I was mad, as usual, and actually I quite agree with her, because not often you go out and buy a train like that, do you? That train cost me £1. So it was taken as part of getting back to East Grinstead. We do hope to find a proper home for it, because I think one of the things that we've all seen, and particularly yourselves with Underground, but certainly on Third Rail Electric, is once they're off the juice, that's it. What do you do? And it's a great shame. As I said, I'd rather see that belting around at 90 mile an hour. Of course, it's all slam door, so there have to be modifications made. But it's an important part of heritage history, because there's not many things left like. Most of those are now baked bean cans. So, to finally round the evening off, meet the fleet. You've probably thought I've spoken enough about railways. Well, I have also own various bits of London Transport. I don't know what percentage of route masters and RTs I own. Must be very small, but nonetheless, this is one I did have. I've had parted with this. This is RM811, and I was given it by the artist David Shepard. You know David Shepard and his works. Well, David had that for displaying his works around the country, but I think I must confess that it's probably one route master too much. But nonetheless, I had it for a while, got it going, it's fully mechanical, it's got a lovely AEC engine in it, it sounds right. Most of it was in original condition, even the seats upstairs were still in place, but downstairs was gutted. So unfortunately, I just had to part with it at the end of last year, but it's found a new home, and because it was severely converted, I'm not too upset about what they've done, but they've made a nice job of it. So if you're ever over in Dublin, you can have an afternoon tea on it, and this is literally, these pictures were taken at the weekend. But this is the fleet. Well, this is RMLs. Now, several years ago, well back in 2004, when you're out with your friends one night and you decide to ask the question, I wonder what ever happened to my school bus? And it all goes quiet, and then someone rings you up one day and says, you know your school bus? And you said, yes. They said, it's on the 390, working out of Holloway. And I said, oh, right, okay. Needless to say, I went and bought it. And when she worked, she was the very last, 2731 was the very last one on the 390. And I've had her now, well, since 2004. Sister here, 2620. They've both got Cummins engines in it, but we've kept them in Metro. I think it's a rather, out of all the liveries, I think it's a very attractive livery. I do like it. This was at Potter's Bar open day this year, and another one of the fleet, RM349. And this is mine. Sorry, it's on the side again. As you can see, 154 Sutton Garage. I've always liked the 154. 3775. 3775 was the It was always red. It was delivered and stored to Merton back in 1953, the Bluebell used it to take people between East Grinstead and Kingscote, and that was by London and Country. And when they went out of business, or the contract changed to Metro Bus, she went with it. And I can remember her last day. There was gaps underneath the window. The riser had gone at the back. There was air between the handrail and the platform. And I thought that's probably the last time I see her. Then, strangely enough, Steve Newman at Ensigns rang me up and said, would I like to buy it? So at that particular time, from my bit of retirement money, I'd bought RML 2730, and which we took you on your birthday, Fred. And I sold RML 2730 and bought RT 3775. That's better. So there she is at Brooklands this year, with the final member of the fleet, RT 1777, which we acquired because the owner had no further use for it, and it's been put back as a driver trainer, and it's quite popular on the circuit because everybody likes to put them back into shiny condition, which I do, but it's nice to put one back as a trainer as well. So they're both regular appearers. They're both tucked away at the moment for the winter, and in fact one 777 having its engine overhauled. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That is what's called a 9F. This was a picture which was taken on the opening day to East Grinstead. But so this is the engine my wife knows nothing about. I'm sure she'll find out one day. It's my engine's 92240. It was a Barry wreck, but that was Jeremy Hoskins' 9F, which we had it on hire to help us open the Bluebell back to East Grinstead. So, thank you for your time. I know I'm slightly over. I hope you've enjoyed some of the pictures which I've shown you. I do apologise if some of the underground ones are yours. I do apologise. I was in desperate need of a D78 one. I couldn't find one in time, so I borrowed one. And I'm not going to buy the A60 rack. I do apologise as much as I'd like to. But thank you for your attention, and I hope that just gives you a flavour of some of the things that I've had to do over my years as chairman of Bluebell. Like I said, it doesn't just stop because you're no longer chairman, because I want to keep going. Like you, ladies and gentlemen, want to go on, because you want to make sure that what you're saving now is in good order for the future. Because as the people that get off the train say to me, when they walk out of East Grinstead, they say, if it wasn't for you, this wouldn't be here. So like yourselves, if it wasn't for you, what you're doing wouldn't be here. So well done to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure Roy will be happy to take a few questions, but before we go to that, I think I can fill in a bit more about the David Shepard bus, because unless he had more than one, it must be 20 years ago, he approached the London Transport Museum wanting a bus, I think, as a mobile display for his wildlife activities. And through the good offices of my predecessor, bar one as chairman, Brian Staines, a deal was negotiated whereby Brian, because of his connections with London Transport as Chief Supplies Officer, managed to get what I presume is that bus donated to David, in return for which David Shepard painted a picture of a route master going over Westminster Bridge. And that hangs to this day in the Friends office, and he's actually, I would imagine, probably one of the Friends' most valuable assets. I don't think there's any plan to sell it off. But we do have a David Shepard original, and that's because of the deal that was brokered for what I presume was that very bus.
He also painted a Lancaster for the Battle of Britain Memorial flight, but sadly they didn't give him a Lancaster.
Got us into a little bit of hot water because it was suggested that he was inspired by the picture, by somebody else's picture of a route master going over Westminster Bridge, and we almost ended up in the courts over that, but never mind. Right, a very comprehensive presentation, ladies and gentlemen, but 10-15 minutes for some questions if you'd like to probe Roy in a little bit more detail about what's going on the Bluebell. Right at the front, was that a hand going up? Yes.
Yeah, I know very little about the Bluebell Railway. That's why I've come here tonight. But how did the name come about?
It came about that the railways in the south were known by their various nicknames. So the Bluebell line was known as the Blue because of the proliferation of bluebells that grew up alongside the track. There was a line that went between Erridge and Eastbourne that was known as the Cuckoo line because it was said that you would always hear the first cuckoo of spring along that line. The line that went from Halstead Canes to Haywards Heath was known as the Primrose line because of primroses that grew along. In fact, like you find in life, there is a society for anything. I didn't realise there's an A-Road Appreciation Society. There is. You can Google it. There is an A-Road Appreciation Society. But there is also a Bluebell Bulb Appreciation Society, and they do exist because they came down and hired a train, and they agreed that we agreed we could stop off at certain points where they could throw out bulbs that would grow. Because you see, if you talk about a Spanish bluebell, that is heresy to them. It has to be an English bluebell, which has a perfect bell and a perfect clangor, if you like, whereas the Spanish variety is wild and is misshapen. But they all were known by various. Like the Poppy line was the line that went from Folkestone to the harbour, because that took the soldiers off to the First World War. Some sadly never to come back. But the Midhants was known as the Alps, because it's got very steep gradients. So lots of railway lines have nicknames. That's how they got them.
Another small thing, seeing one of your pictures, it was very special to my wife here. It's the Flying Scotsman.
Uh-huh.
Her grandfather actually drove the train.
Oh, right.
He's one of the drivers.
Yeah.
In about 1930, was it?
Well, he retired in 32, so he drove it for 2 years.
Yes, yeah.
Is it visited Easter next year?
Next Easter, yeah,
Yeah.
Easter next year is coming
It
down
may
south.
not be in the same
It won't have the same number, will
number.
it?
4472. Oh, no, it's 60103, isn't it? Sorry.
It's gone past the British Rail.
Gone British Rails,
Which
yeah.
I think is a bit sad.
Mm. There's a debate about whether she'll have smoke deflectors or not as well, isn't there?
I don't know what my granddad's thinking with the numbers, James.
No, I know.
Right, any other questions?
If you want to know about Ardingly, I'll fill in that one. The Bluebell was offered the line back to Ardingly because the owners of what's called the Bald Hill Estate, which are big landowners in the south, wanted to release some of their land. So everybody's expecting us to build the line back between Halstead Canes, Ardingly and Haywards Heath. It's a difficult one to really consider because can you imagine, put your mind back to that little P-class and 2 carriages, can you imagine that trundling along the Brighton main line into Haywards Heath from Copyhold Junction? Can you imagine something wrong and we fouled up the busiest main line in the south of England? I think it's a big ask, and I'm going to say it, I don't think we'll see Ardingly Haywards Heath in my lifetime. I'm only 42, and I definitely think that it's great to have it. It's like lots of these things, nice to have it, but let's just look after it. There may come a time where people, chairman in the future will say, let's go to Ardingly. There may be an opportunity, but it is a big ask.
And the Haywards Heath town plan that we're voting on as a resident on Thursday makes specific provision for
it does indeed
to come in.
So it's not all over.
Can I ask about the health of the Metropolitan set, which obviously we hold dear?
You can indeed, which is why I put some pictures up so that you can see. There's work being done on it now. There's some of the locks that need renewing. The Mets were a particular favourite of ours, and we tried not to put them out too often in public service on our line, simply because of the wear and tear they get. But they're very good capacity sets to use. But there's we knew there were certain problems with the bogies, some of the electrics, and the door locks in particular, which wouldn't have gone down too well on the network if you were going to use it. So work has started now on trying to work out the best way to I think it's about 50 locks they require. I think it's the locking mechanism, which and there was we're looking at what's it called, a CNC mill machine, which we should be able to compute, and it should be able to cut and pattern the makings of the locks that we require to make those doors safer. They weren't unsafe. Please don't. Probably not the word I shouldn't have used, but we need to make sure they're robust, I think is the word I should use, because we want to see it out on the Met again.
One question there.
Hello. I travelled on your railway within the last month.
Thank you.
And I noticed that there seemed to be quite a lot of speed restrictions on the line. Have you got a lot of work to do on the permanent
We
way?
have indeed. If you may have seen, well, we've the line was closed for 2 weeks in November, where we renewed a quarter of a mile of track north of Horsted Canes. We've put a completely new set of points in at Leamden Junction, and the winter work this year. In January, we are relaying a quarter of a mile of track at Waterworks, and in February, we are relaying roads 2 and 3 in Horsted Canes. That's the middle 2 roads, which will take out the last remnants of the third rail. But they're being completely relayed. It's very simple, is that there are things called Old Father Time. Some of those rails are now life expired. Some of those rails we've lifted out have actually still got London, Brighton and South Coast on them. But of course on a backwater railway line, they're fine for 25 mile an hour. But of course now Bullhead Rail is becoming extremely difficult to get hold of. We know the Underground uses it, and if the Underground wants to ever get rid of some Bullhead Rail, please do get in touch with me, and because we would like to reuse Bullhead where possible. But it's like everything else. Like we spoke about the door locks on the Mets, the actual rails themselves are showing signs of wear and tear. They're wearing out. We have to replace. So we've got quite a comprehensive programme of track replacement coming in. The other thing too, like I mentioned earlier on, was rabbits. There's a couple of bits where rabbits have got in, so we've got to get them out, and we've then got to put concrete in to firm up the embankment. So it's a combination of things. The worst thing that you find, and we had it 3 years ago, just before Santa started, the day before Christmas, the day before our Santa services started at Horsted Canes, and it was torrential rain. It had been torrential rain all week, and everything was ready to go with the Santa trains, very important part of the year, and we had a landslide just south of Horsted Canes which severed the line. And it was purely because age and the design. The Victorians were fantastic designers when you think of what they achieved in their build, but some of it was done on a very quick and easy scale. So they just dug it out. Drainage is not the kind of drainage we need for today's weather, for example. So unfortunately we had a big dig out, and new drainage has been put in to try and prevent that. So if you talk to a good old civil engineer, they'll tell you drainage, drainage, drainage. It's all important. So yes, wear and tear and a general rolling programme of track renewal. Because without track, you've got no trains.
Is there a last question anywhere? There we are, the youngest member of the audience.
You've got a membership form. You want to join? Can you sign on at 5 on Saturday?
I think the Underground's already claimed him, Judge.
Are there any listed buildings or parts of the Bluebell Railway?
Yes, the signal box at Horsted Canes and a set area around it are listed. But they're the viaduct at East Grinstead is Grade 2. So yes, there are 2 listed parts of the Bluebell. So anything that you have to do has to represent what it was. Make sure the window frames are. It can be a hindrance sometimes. Listed buildings. I'm sure some of you have come across it when what you have to do and what you have to put back and what you can't do. But yes, it's 2 parts, and that viaduct is one. We're particularly proud of that viaduct. Actually, it's very solid. It's certainly built to last. You could actually go down in each of the pillars onto the inside because it was their drainage system. We didn't find any dead horses or dead navvies or wagons or any other things that people tell you used to fall down. We did find a pick or a shovel, I think it was, down one, but no, that's the 2 listed buildings we've got.
Okay, we'll draw a halt to the formalities there. Before I thank Roy, just a few final announcements from me. We will have the usual drinks outside. If you're able to linger for a little bit longer, please enjoy those. Take a chance to have another word with Roy if you like, but give generously as always in the bowls provided to cover the cost of those refreshments. I meant to say at the beginning that I hope many of you have managed to book with your friends preferential day on Hidden London tours, most of which are now sold out, I believe, but a few, particularly 55 Broadway tours, and you have two guides of the 55 Broadway tours in the audience tonight. There are still some places, certainly on 55 Broadway, and I think on one or two of the others, if you go on the website and check. It is the last meeting, as I said at the beginning, before Christmas, so even though it is still, as we speak, early November, can I say on behalf of the management of the Friends and the Museum, to all of you, we hope you have a very pleasant and happy Christmas, and that all of us have an equally successful 2017 as 2016 has certainly been, as far as our own activities have been. But our thanks finally to Roy on what's really been a tremendous presentation, delivered, you will notice, with, well, a few notes which I don't think he ever looked at on a small piece of paper, but basically all from the heart, about what has been a truly remarkable period. I had difficulty with coping with the notion that someone can actually be chairman of an organisation for 19 years, but we'll see. It is
I used to have hair, Barry.
Yeah. A remarkable achievement of what Roy managed to do at the Bluebell Railway, and still continues, as you'll know, to get involved in, from how he was able to answer questions about today rather than even the most recent past. But a great achievement at a time when Roy was doing a remarkably demanding job with Sainsbury's at the same time. That connection obviously proved very useful in a number of respects. So our very grateful thanks to Roy, and I'm sure you'll show your appreciation in the usual way.